Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So we have now arrived at the last panel for the day. I hope that you enjoyed the previous session. So for the panel, African content, how to compete with international SVOD platform. So I have the pleasure to welcome for this session, Damola Ademola, co-founder of Inkblock Production, Stephen Watson, Managing Director of Dion, Mike Moy, Content Marketing and Brand Development at StarTimes, and Ryan Solovek, Country Manager for View. So before diving into the panel questions, so let us first start with a quick presentation of each speaker and their core responsibilities within their company. So maybe we can start with Damola. So tell us a bit more, how is Inkblock doing?
Oh, we're doing great right now. We're in the middle of, we've got a bunch of movies coming out in the next couple of months. We've got one coming out in October. December is a really great period for movies in Nigeria. We've got one coming out then, and we've got like 3 more coming out next year. Also, we are in partnership with a streamer, and we're presently in the middle of production of series for them.
So before talking about competition in the Nigerian video market and everything, so what have been the main changes in terms of production and distribution that you have witnessed?
I can say that over the years, in the last 5 years, right? I was talking to someone recently, and I said, if you made a movie for like about 30 million naira, sometime like 5 or 6 years ago, that would have been a big budget production. In recent times, we've seen production go up as high as 5 times that amount, partly because in recent times, the cinema space has gotten bigger. And not only that, a lot of our content is now getting licensed on SVOD platforms like your Netflix, like your Amazon and co. So, and they are then starting to not only just license our content, but also starting to produce some original content here in Nigeria. So you're now seeing bigger productions coming out of Nigeria. You're also seeing people spending more time creating larger set pieces, more larger than life productions, because it's getting way more profitable now. So that's changing a whole lot.
Thank you, Damola. So Stefan, being on the market for quite some time now with Diod, and Diod being an all-inclusive B2B platform also. So tell us more how Diod is helping telcos and broadcasters to develop their VOD offer.
I think what we've tried to essentially do is position ourselves as a B2B service offering, where we offer our telcos and broadcasters a fully managed service, strategic support, content licensing and acquisition. So we manage the entire video ecosystem for them. We've seen a massive upswing in the interest from both broadcasters and telcos in getting into the video on demand space. For this particular subject, SVOD has always been a challenge in Africa. You know, if you look previously at mainstream content, a lot of players who've looked to the popular Hollywood Western content have struggled to monetize their services. There's a high level of piracy in the market around that kind of product. And you know, to extract value out of the consumer's wallet, you've really got to make sure you've got a product that talks to that consumer in each and every market. And Africa isn't one market. Africa has multiple markets, and each one of them have their own nuances. So we're in our 8th year now of supporting various partners in looking at their strategies. And what we're seeing more and more is reduced pricing in this marketplace. I mean, if you go back to the first SVOD services that launched, if you take South Africa, Video was the first with Times Media. You know, they were certainly a plus 100 Rand offering. Showmax, I think, was the first to go below the 100 Rand at the 99 Rand offering. You've seen big players like Netflix and MultiChoice launch mobile-only packages. Pricings have now dropped well below the 50 Rand mark. Yeah. So you see pressure on pricing for SVOD services. We've seen the huge influx of international entities coming in, which is great for the industry. They have the advantage of being able to aggregate their technology spend and their content spend across multiple markets. And a lot of them are are fueled by the mature market, the American market penetration that they have. But as you've just heard from the previous panelists, they're stimulating the creative industry, they're licensing local content to talk to their local consumers. So overall, it's great for Africa. But I think for the telcos and broadcasters looking at the SVOD space, they've really got to make the decision that how do you find your own niche within this space? It's not just pricing, it's the overall packaging of your product, and where do you play? So you're starting to see more and more blended services where you've got services like one of the ones we manage now for Telkom in South Africa, Telkom One, which has a substantial free offering as well as a subscription offering. And I think we're going to see more of that. We're going to see more ad-funded content with potentially the upsell of a premium offering in the SVOD space as Africa continues to mature in the video on demand sector.
Thank you, Stefan. So coming up to Michael. So with your experience on the African market and also with StarTimes, so how has content strategy evolved over the past years? And according to, taking into perspective StarTimes, so how much did StarTimes increase in its investment in local content, for instance?
Well, I think one of the first things that we needed to do was to redefine what content is. And one of those ways is to look at content way beyond what we always ordinarily consider to be audio visual. Because if we continue to have a narrow view of what content is and classify it as audio visual, then the business doesn't necessarily grow. We also now have to begin to look at content in the context of experience. And when you look at content and define content also as an experience, then you begin to open up. And in view of that, StarTimes also now began by, trying to expand StarTimes on its digital platform, but also we introduced something called StarTimes Go, which is now an online shopping experience, because we do believe that the two of them, all these two different platforms can be able to work effectively with the visual or the audio visual platform that we already have, which is now, the pay TV platform. So, for example, with the StarTimes Go, what we started to do is, I think in Africa, we began to acquire more digital platforms. We began to acquire more local leagues, for example, like in Kenya, for example. Now, what we did is we also then bring in a different element, like the betting element, like the online element. So if, for example, people are watching football, can we be able to partner with different partners on our digital platforms such as Jumia or Gigi, bring all of these guys in, so you can now be able to order your whiskey or your beer or, all these things while you enjoy watching that live football that we've acquired for you. So, and I think that's what StarTimes has now been doing, where we've simply been expanding the definition of the word content. Can you include things like online shopping? So we're really in a transformative stage right now.
Thank you, Mike. So Ryan, 2 years now that Viewed has made its debut in Africa. So how is Viewed doing? So what are the next thing that we should expect from you?
Hey, Priscilla. So thanks for having me on the panel today. It's actually 3 years, so we're now in our 3rd year of operation. It's certainly been an interesting journey to get to this point. As Stephen pointed out, a lot of services have come, a lot of services have gone, and the one constant that we've seen is the pricing for subscriptions has been pushed down by the market. South Africa is quite an interesting market. There is not a lot of OTT competitors. If you look at some of the other emerging markets around the world, we draw a lot of familiarities with Malaysia as an example in our group. But the difference is you've got a lot of competitors there. You've still got a very monopolistic DTH player as well. So for us, I think the last 3 years have been successful. We've built up a big user base in South Africa. It's been very focused on the free-to-air space. So View is a freemium platform. There's a free service, and then there's a paid-for service as well. And we've built scale around the free-to-air side of the business. And we're now looking to build out more SVOD value to our subscribers. SVOD is a difficult business in South Africa and in Africa at large. I think, you would have recently seen in the news, Netflix have launched a free service in Kenya. That's a bit of a game changer. Interesting to see how that will pan out. I think on a positive note, data pricing has come down tremendously. It's been a point of discussion over the years, and we've seen data pricing come down quite nicely. And I think in terms of competition, there's still a lot more competition to come, and I think we'll see what happens in the next couple of months.
Thank you very much, all of you, for this roundtable. I mean, getting to know more about your product and your offers. So getting into the subjects, so the streaming and OTT landscape. So you all agree that there's a lot of transformation that you have witnessed, be it in terms of consumption, audience, and content. So we have also seen a surge of international players like Netflix, Amazon, YouTube. So what are the impact? I mean, what are the impact that these players is having on the African market? So maybe we can start with Tamola.
So I mean, I like what Ryan said when he brought up the Netflix offering like the free service in Kenya. And all I can say is that, I mean, the way I look at it is Kenya has possibly one of the cheapest data plans in the whole of Africa. So doing that in Kenya, I mean, it's basically them just zero rating the Netflix app. In Nigeria over here, we've got like two of our telcos, Airtel and Globacom right now, also offering like streaming services. So like an SVOD version. And their licensing fees aren't as good as Netflix or Amazon. So there is some challenge there. And I mean, for us in Nigeria as a whole, we churn out a lot of movies and everybody is constantly looking for different ways to basically drive distribution. And the streaming services have provided another stream for distribution for us. Prior to this, you had guys doing a lot of their distribution on YouTube. I know a bunch of people who produce movies just to put on YouTube and are racking up 2 million, 5 million views, 10 million views for their movies. And they just basically roll that over into the next movie and into the next movie. And are doing that as some are doing it as aggregators, some are doing it in the sense that they're churning out like 5 to 6 movies a year and they're basically putting them on YouTube. So everybody's constantly looking for a different way. What the streaming services have done for us is, one, it's opened up the world to our content. So that way, I think it's added a little more, added some value, some dollar value to the content coming out of Nigeria or possibly coming out of Africa. And then it's making it more accessible to other regions.
Thank you, Damola. So Mike, you were yeah, I know you were smiling when talking about Kenya. So would like to have your point of view on that also.
All right. I think Netflix's the new offering is definitely a response to what the market is. Just to give some of the numbers, for example, Tanzania's, I mean, in dollar terms, in terms of the cost, in Kenya, the cost of data is $2.65 per GB. And in South Africa, it's $2.67 per GB. In Tanzania, it's $0.97 per GB. And in South Sudan, it's $0.51 per GB worth of data. So we definitely rank up there in being one of the most expensive in Africa, which is not necessarily a good thing, regardless of how expansive it is. So what Netflix has basically done with this new particular offering is that they're responding to a barrier to entry. And in Kenya, the barrier to entry in terms of the digital ecosystem has always been cost. So what now they've done is simply, they're basically annihilating the competition by this new strategy. And I think it's an amazing offer for the market. It's definitely disruptive. Kenya is not very developed in the OTT space. We can count a couple of players who are in it. We have View, Sasa, who are not necessarily as developed. Safaricom, one of the telcos in Kenya, has just developed a new a platform. It's called Base, not necessarily doing too well. It's not too expansive or very robust in their content offering, but they are definitely getting in there. So for us, I think it's a wake-up call to start looking at new models on how to bring down cost, or now just basically how to engage more audiences. If the barrier is there, how do you go around that particular barrier? They've done this. And by the time the market tries to catch up, I do believe Netflix is going to be miles ahead on this one.
Thank you very much, Mike. Stefan, so how do you expect Netflix, Amazon, and YouTube to influence the African markets? It's also, we have also someone from the audience who asked specifically for the Kenyan market, which Mike just explained.
I think the key thing if we look at all of the major international players, as I touched on a little earlier, Africa is an emerging market for them. It's a secondary, a market to their mainstream markets, the Americas and Europe. They have vast investment in content. So, I mean, if you were to take a stat, what the top 20 services in the US spend and invest in producing new content every year, there are only 4 countries in Africa that have a GDP greater than their content investment. So, they really bring the challenge to local players. As Damulla said, they've opened up the industry for the creative producers, like his business. They write good checks for the right content. They write even bigger checks if it's exclusive. And in most cases, they're insisting on exclusivity. So they're very good for the creative industry. We've gone from a production space where there were 1 or 2 checks in town to now people competing for local content. And I think the key thing there is they've all realized that local content that is socially and culturally relevant, topical in the market is more powerful than necessarily trying to push Western content or Eastern content to the market. Yes, the Western and Eastern content can fill the stockings, bulk up the catalog. But if you look at all of the services, if they've launched an original, even if you come back to MultiChoice's service, Showmax originals have outperformed the best series that they've licensed from HBO. So I think the market has recognized that local content is key. And to a degree, I think that this also talks to the point around data. For years, we've been discussing data, cost of data. Data is the Achilles heel. But, as being party to a number of telcos who have licensed and spent, in some cases, hundreds of millions of rands on content, in some cases, more than R1 billion in content. And then they've zero-rated the data to try and drive uptake in SVOD subscriptions, and it hasn't moved the needle. So they've given the data away, and they haven't been able to monetize the SVOD product because it was largely full of Western content, and they didn't have any of those exclusives or originals, or the content that they had licensed in had already been seen on Trace or MultiChoice or on a different platform or their local broadcaster. So I think there's a number of key ingredients that you have to get right to touch on the African market. And if we look at the big players that are coming in, it's a very interesting space. We've seen BritBox arrive, which is a British catalog in South Africa. Disney Plus has announced that they're on the way to the African market, likely the middle of next year. And the result of that is a lot of these mainstream US players are actually starting to retract their content licensing rights from the market so that they retain an exclusive destination for people to come and enjoy their specific content. But off the back of that, they're immediately announcing plans of local content partnerships. So I think we're going to see more and more investment. I think YouTube, as we all know, if you talk to most telcos, a huge amount of the traffic that's crossing their network is YouTube. And that again proves nobody's zero-rated YouTube's data. One or two telcos have done it. It's bulky data. They've then moved on to the services like WhatsApp or messaging services. But what YouTube proves to me, that if your content resonates, irrespective of the data price, in any market across Africa, people are consuming it. Yes, they might be consuming it in internet cafes or even downloading it at the office. Point is, they're finding a way to consume the content on YouTube. The challenge is, as an SVOD service, as soon as you put any of this content behind a price wall, then there's a number of things that are immediately expected by the African consumer. They expect your platform, technology-wise, to be on par with whatever is trending and the latest in the US. They won't accept that yours, because it's African or local, can be less advanced or is not using AI or recommendation engines to give them the service. So you're immediately under pressure for technical parity. And if they're going to pay you for the content, they expect it to be unique. They expect it to resonate. They expect strong refresh rates. It can't be the same content a month from now. You've got to continuously communicate with them to tell them that you've got new content that appeals to them. And you've really then got to decide who your audience is. So there's a lot of moving pieces, but Ryan's touched on, he's been in this space for 3 years, and before that, Ryan's been involved in other SVOD services. You learn so much in 8 years in this African market that I think really highlights it differs substantially from the mature market. If you remember when Disney switched on in the US, they had 10 million subscriptions in 24 hours. Okay? And before the end of Q1 of launching the service, they were beyond like 30 million subscriptions. If you look at the trajectory of Netflix and the multi-choices of this world, they all tracking towards trying to get to 1 million SVOD paying subscribers, continuously subscribing on a monthly basis to Africa. Everybody's on the journey to 1 million, and they've been in the market for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years now. So the biggest thing for the African market is you have to acknowledge the internationals. You have to decide what your unique sweet spot's going to be, how aggressively you're going to be priced, what your strategy is, and most importantly, you've got to have stakeholders who are patient, because it's a long journey. There is no switch on and get rich in SVOD overnight in Africa.
Thank you, Stefan. So Ryan, Stefan was talking a little bit about monetization opportunity. So is there a room for local AVOD players within the African market? So as View is also an advertising video on demand, so we would like to have your point of view on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And as Stephen pointed out again, SVOD is a very tough business in Africa. Yeah. And it's going to be very hard to change that trend. And it's a very difficult one to kind of tackle. So that leads you to, can one build a sustainable AVOD business in Africa? And I think the answer is yes. But AVOD platforms and SVOD platforms are very different in their technical nature and the requirements that are needed to be put into place. You've got YouTube as an example, which is an extremely sophisticated monetization platform that you're competing with. You've also got Facebook and a whole lot of other social media platforms that have penetrated the market. And in fact, in South Africa, almost, upwards of 60, 70, even potentially 80% of digital marketing spend is with those types of social media platforms. So, you do have to have the technology that supports a AVOD platform. And then, you've got to have scale as well. So, we've been successful in creating scale up to a point. We're not, as big as YouTube by any means whatsoever. So to really generate the kind of revenues that one needs to generate in order to pay licensing fees produce content at scale, it's a very difficult business also to make happen. But there is success. We've seen success. We continue to grow our advertising revenue month on month. We have a lot of brands who continue to come onto our platform. View has become a recognized platform to a lot of agencies and a lot of brands. And it does offer a very niche opportunity for brands to advertise on the platform. There's click-through banners. There's a lot of data that we give advertisers. And those things, one can charge a premium fee for. So one has to think out of the box. You're not going to beat YouTube. You need to offer a different type of a service. So yeah, AVOD is an exciting business, and I think we've done fairly well with it as well.
Thank you, Ryan. So Damola, so we talking about you've been working with Netflix. So what are the type of relationships that can local players can have, with international platform in terms of co-production, distribution opportunities, but also in terms of funding strategies?
So if you look at it, there usually are three different ways, right? So most times, for example, in Nigeria, you work through an aggregator and you can get your content license. That's phase one, where you've developed your content, you've probably gone through the cinema window or you've created a TV series, and then you can get it through an aggregator and you get the license. Other bit is if your content really resonates, then they can then acquire your content, and then it becomes like an acquired license. So I'll give you a case in point. A while back, 2 years ago, a movie came out called King of Boys. It was really popular here in Nigeria. It got onto the Netflix platform. It did very, very well. And then while the production of the sequel was in production, it got acquired by Netflix. And then now it's on Netflix as a 7-part series, right? So that was acquired. Then you have the opportunities where you get commissioned to create content for the streamer. Those are the three platforms, and then those are the different ways that people go through. I think it's one of the things, I think it's great, anyone, because most developed producers like me essentially create our content in the hope of getting it through cinema, getting it distributed, and we just use this streamer as one of those avenues to get it licensed. If your content really does really well on the platform, then you have options for deeper conversations about it getting acquired, or then reaching out to you to then produce content for them. But I would like to go back to something Stefan said. I want to ask a question, really, sorry if I digress a little bit. With what Netflix is doing with the free plan in Kenya, they're basically breaking through the barrier of data. Because if you look at something like multi-choice, for example, you have a decoder at home, you basically pay your monthly subscription, and then you have access to that, and that's all you pay. The problem that you have with the streamers is that you have to pay your monthly subscription, then you also have to pay for the data. So if they are zero rating their service right now, doesn't that deal with the friction or the barrier to entry?
So if the question's to me, I think, the proof is in the pudding. Like I said, if you go back to the days when MTN launched in South Africa and they launched Front Row, if you look at the days of Cell C Black, in both cases, at one point or other, the broadcaster zero rated the data for on-net customers to access their bouquets of content and channels. And inevitably, both those services shut down. We're not commercially successful. So the zero rating of the data, look, by all means makes it more appealing. You've had other broadcasters give huge off-peak data. Very interesting, obviously, revelation in the South African market this week is the launch of DSTV's internet service. So why is a broadcaster launching an MVNO internet service? Well, you can imagine that they've got the ability to sign up broadband customers off the back of offering Super Sport as a packaged offering with your internet. And so I think there's a recognition that if you're in the streaming space, you have a dependency on on data for customers to consume, whether that's fixed line or mobile. And if you can bundle again, the multi-play model where you can package relevant and exciting content with a home or mobile broadband offering, potentially with your device, with your router, with your smartphone, with your PC, then you're starting to offer the consumer a compelling package deal that offers more value. If you look at most mobile networks, their peak data traffic is still business. During the day, business consumes and drives traffic across a network. And at night, a lot of those networks are not at capacity. If you were to chart the internet traffic across America from the East Coast to the West Coast in the evenings, it looks like a python that swallowed a cow. There's this huge bubble of traffic that crosses America. And that whole bubble of traffic is Netflix, YouTube, and gamers as they get home from work. And it just crosses the country. So content is a major driver of data traffic to the extent that in certain mature markets, networks are trying to look at sophisticated ways of moving that pressure on the network off to satellite and back onto the network. And naturally, what you're seeing is this convergence of broadcasters and partnerships with telcos for that very reason. When you zero rate it, you do move the friction point. There is a big question in a telco's business plan of, if I've zero rated the data, which is my core revenue right now. I mean, I make money out of data being a necessity to communicate. If I zero rate that, then I have to be confident that I can start to sustain my overheads through value-added services, not just content, but digital banking, insurance. We've seen all of the telcos move into more and more value-added services. How do they offer their consumers more? I'm not sure whether the race to zero data is on right now. It'll be interesting to watch the Netflix model. But ultimately, if Netflix is zero rating the data, they're paying a telco and they've measured that consumption. Is it a long-term strategy? Is it a permanent strategy? The key thing is there's a partnership, and it does remove the friction point. I'm not convinced that that is going to give them immediate scale like you've seen in mature markets, because as I've mentioned, it's been done by multiple players before and it didn't necessarily move the needle. If you've got zero rated data pricing and really relevant content that talks to the market, I mean, Utopia, free data, free live football, has to be a successful platform, right? I mean, it's got to be. But you know, there's monetization behind that for the licensor, the telco, the broadcaster, and at some point we've got to put bread on the table for the sportsmen or producers like you. So it's going to be an interesting space, and as I think the blend of free services with data subsidized or data free and subscription services, we're going to see more and more of these partnerships. And all that does is put more pressure on pricing and enforces kind of this amalgamation of partnerships in the market to gain traction.
Thanks, Stefan. So Stefan was talking about the importance of local content, original content. So is it something key for StarTimes also?
It is, without a doubt, it is. It's a trend that we've been seeing over time. And I guess for us now, it's the art of telling the story and how to expand that into any other spectrum. So yes, over the years, we've actually started to reduce on our investment in international content and started more on the local investment. I can tell you, over the past 3 years, for example, we've increased our investment in local content by 600%. And that says a lot, but we've also cut back by around 200% on international content. And this is definitely proving to be a little bit more successful. Our challenge has simply now been, again, as I've indicated before, the issue is for us, the fine art of storytelling. how do we start to tell more compelling stories to drive subscriptions up? And, you know, I think this is always going to be, it's always a long journey, especially when we compare ourselves, for example, to Nigeria, for example, or South Africa, where, you know, when we watch Netflix, we're seeing more and more developed stories, but the level of investment as well, when it comes to maybe cost per episode, for example, has significantly shot up. And that's what the international players are doing. So for us who have to play, you know, where we still have to deal with this, with a physical set of books and the technology thereof that is required to expand to our customer base, we are a little bit more careful on how we spend our money to, you know, to deep our foot into the content acquisition space.
Thank you, Mike. So Ryan, so what is view, content expansion strategy? So do you face, are you currently facing any challenges?
So my internet was given an issue. Was the question addressed to me?
No, it was addressed to Ryan. Thanks.
Yeah, challenges. Priscilla, I think it certainly has been a year of challenges for everyone. In terms of our challenges, our business is now very reliant on production of local content. We move more and more away from the reliance on international content. We know and we've seen how locally produced content moves the needle for a platform like ours. So we've now just actually, in fact, we've greenlit our second season of our show Ubetina Wetu, which is a 52-part series, and for us, you know, local production is first and foremost. So the challenges that local production, faces is it's still expensive to produce content. Comes at a cost. It also takes time to produce relevant local content. And when you start looking at, in as much as there's been lots of successful platforms and lots of failed platforms, there's also been lots of successful content and failed content. So we kind of continue to look for content that works for our market, that resonates with our market, a locally produced South African market. And the problem is to try and scale that content as quick as possible. And that's what we're busy doing right now. So locally produced content is key for us, really. And I think just also to just address some of the the discussion around this Netflix Kenya scenario. I mean, it comes as a bit of a shock to the market, and I think it was kind of imminent that it would happen. But I don't think, the question I've got, maybe to the panel and to the audience is, would Netflix offer local produced Kenyan content for free? So yes, if you look at the content offering, it's made content that doesn't resonate with the audience 100% free. Not the content that the audience doesn't really want to watch, they're made for free. But when it comes to their blockbuster Kenyan piece of content, will that be made for free is the question. And I don't think that they will make it available for free. So I think it's, they haven't, I don't know if they've seen much success in the Kenyan market. And is this just a ploy to try and lure customers into download the app? So yeah, interesting nevertheless.
Maybe perhaps I can respond to that for just a second and say, when you look at the numbers in Kenya, so for example, mobile penetration sits at currently 122% in Kenya. But the cost of data is, I think, what I've indicated before. It's around $2.67 per GB. As long as the barrier stays what it is, I like speaking numbers, and sometimes they're boring in themselves, but they are what they are. Our GDP per capita, I think, is currently sitting at $1,600 and something as compared to South Africa's, which is $6,000 and above. So when we look at how much the customer base, I mean, the penetration is there, and I think what Netflix wants to do is to ride on the penetration itself. Once the penetration is there, then perhaps at some point I have to agree with what Stephen said, is this cannot be a long-term strategy. At some point they will have to pull back. They will have to pull back and we will have to pay. But rumor has it, I think, that the numbers in the market in terms of number of subscribers in Kenya, round about to 200,000 or less currently for Netflix. When you look at, again, 122,000, 132% mobile phone or smartphone penetration in the market, there is a potential, but that potential needs to be realized. And I think that's what Netflix is doing. But the strategy that they're employing currently must be a short to medium-term one. It cannot be a long-term one. I highly doubt it will be.
I agree with you, Michael.
Yep.
Not sustainable.
Thank you. So we have a question. We have some question from the audience. So they're talking about outside of telco. So it would be good to hear, more about why the infrastructure investment by technology, be it by technology or communication firms. So if any of the panelists would like to take this question.
I can take a stab at it. So luckily for us in Nigeria, we've seen like the cost of data tumble down over time, and that's partly due to the fact that within the last 10 years or so, we've had like 3 fiber optic cables terminate in Nigeria at some point. So that helped us to a certain extent, where we have almost like a surplus of data at this particular point in time. A lot of people are now getting broadband access to their homes. A lot of people are getting like direct fiber to home and things like that in Nigeria. So of course, these are the things that are helping the industry. I checked out what they call it. I think we sit somewhere around about 100 million people, which is like about half of our population, almost half of the population have internet access right now. Right. But like I said, of course, the cost of data is still super expensive. So if we're talking about something like streaming a movie, where if you are standard definition, you're going to be using up about 1 gig of data, that starts to add up when the cost of 10 gig of data is about what, 5,000, 6,000 naira, something along those lines. So as long as infrastructure keeps trending the way it's trending, we know over time the cost will definitely drop.
Maybe just to add to that point, and specifically to the question of, outside of the telcos, who's investing in infrastructure around the internet, and if we focus that on streaming, we've seen the likes of Amazon Web Services come into the African market, have points of presence in Terrico, in both Johannesburg and Cape Town, and certainly moving up into Africa. And they obviously offer media processing within their services. They have CloudFront, which is their global CDN service with POPs all over the world. So African content producers who publishing content don't have to necessarily worry about the CDN infrastructure or cost of investment in CDN. They can have a pay as you grow model. There's definitely been various technology businesses investing in CDNs in Africa. We've got a long partnership with Liquid Telecom. We've invested significantly in having CDN technology in key markets in Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, emerging markets like Ethiopia coming on board onto the network. And outside of that, I think one of the interesting spaces is, I can count the times we've often sat in front of telco executives and spoken about live channels and live football. And there's an immediate concern due to either the current status of their infrastructure or their 5G migration plans around network congestion based on the maturity of their own infrastructure or aged infrastructure. And so you're starting to see satellite service providers, Intelsat as an example, looking at technologies where you move the traffic off the core network and you bring it down over satellite to the edge of the network. So you stay off the core, you bring it to the tower, and you distribute from the tower to the consumer. So hybrid, not OTT over satellite per se, but means to take the pressure off the core network as video traffic grows. There's a lot of research, a lot of investment, already some pilots happening in that space. There's no doubt about it that streaming traffic is going to continue to grow. As streaming becomes more popular, we've already seen the positive effect, and we don't use these words often, of COVID, where we've had a more digital consumer. We've seen massive growth in video streaming. We're on Zoom right now, having a conference. This is big internet traffic. And ultimately, the infrastructure in Africa can only take so much and can only grow at a certain pace. So I think there's a lot of attention to this. And I believe the emerging markets, specifically Africa, where there may be a lack of penetration. You know, we talk about fiber. Fiber is still to reach some of the rural communities. That network will continue to grow. That we'll see advances in alternative means to get content to the consumer beyond the traditional broadcast means of DTH and DTT. So I think it's a space that we should all be watching closely. And I think Africa has a chance of piloting some of this technologies probably ahead of mature markets.
Thanks, Stefan. So we have nearly arrived, at the end of this session. Maybe one quick question to all of you, and also a question about the future. So what can we expect in the coming years for the African streaming world? So if we can quickly have your point of view, what you are expecting for the coming years for this question. So maybe we can start with Ryan.
So I think in terms of competition, as we've discussed, a lot of the international services like Disney Plus will land in Africa. It will change the landscape and the business model of DSTV's traditional business model, perhaps. It'll also put a lot of pressure or force the big OTTs like Netflix to look at content a little bit differently, perhaps. And I guess it will also put a lot more pressure on the typical SVOD players in Africa. So I think that's what we can expect to see with the launch of Disney Plus. I think Amazon also will probably invest a lot more content, a lot more money in local content. They've got the infrastructure, they've got the technology, they've got the resources. And I think that's probably one of the operators to kind of pay close attention to from the SVOD space. I think, data we've discussed. I think one point just to probably add to the data discussion is the connectivity discussion. We're seeing a lot of penetration of fiber to the home, specifically new types of fiber products. Prepaid fiber in the townships is something that is spreading quite quickly, and that will continue to grow. That will drive adoption it'll drive change of how people consume content traditionally, away from DTH to the internet as a means of getting content. And I think the third thing that we'll see is a lot more local production. Local production is key. Local content is what people really want to see. And even if you look at a service like Showmax, over the last 8 years, their content offering has changed dramatically. So we'll see a lot more localization of these services.
Thank you, Ryan. So Tamola, if you can quickly have your expectations for the coming years.
I hope to be able to do a lot more production for international players. That's number one, fingers crossed. But aside from that, what I definitely feel will map out in the nearest future would be you have a lot more of the international streamers coming into Africa, because for me, I believe Africa is kind of like the last frontier for them. Beyond that, then the next thing would be, the next thing will then be, how do we start to grow? How do we then start, from my point of view, storytelling beyond just the African continent? So the same way we can watch something from the US or Europe and identify with it, how do we gradually, over time, start to create African content that the rest of the world can identify with? That's pretty much happening in Nigeria, for example, with our music, where our music is crossing borders and it's getting, a lot of people in the US are appreciating it. Now, can our storytelling, film-wise or content-wise, audio-visual-wise, can that also make that leap? I feel that's what's happening in the next couple of years from a storytelling point of view.
Thank you, Tamula. Mike?
All right. For my end, I think it's going to be two-way. It's going to be in a couple of ways. One, the content producer is the person who's going to win in this whole story, because, you know, they have everybody. There we go. Hallelujah to you. I can see that. Yeah. So the content producer is definitely going to win. Is most likely going to be perhaps the greatest winner in all of this. Traditional broadcasters are going to lose, and they're going to lose big time. One, by virtue that they are local regulatory authorities who are still very traditional in the type of content that needs to be there, and we have already a very robust customer now. They're exposed to more content, and you can't control what really goes on the digital space. So the good old-fashioned broadcasters are definitely going to be the losers in this particular one. But what happens with more development comes definitive winners, definitive losers, but also the inclusion of new value-add services for people to begin to survive. Because the entry and the production, and just production in itself or local content in itself, is not going to be what wins. It's the experience that now begins to come attached to particular products in the market. So if all of us produce local content, that's not going to be enough at some point. It's going to come down to value-added services that will be coming together with attached to these OTT platforms. That's what I think.
Thanks, Mike. So, Stefan?
Sure. So I agree with a lot of everything the panelists have already said. So maybe just add a few points. I think in the coming years, we're going to see partnerships. We've seen European broadcasters partner to combat and take on the might of the Netflixes of this world, as opposed to siloed efforts. Siloed's costly, tech is costly. So I think we'll see some partnerships. I think we'll see some consolidation in the market. I think if you're pricing your product above the $3 mark, you better have big budgets and be brave to take on the West. But I think the one thing we haven't touched on, and it sits behind subscription, which I think has potentially a massive impact on the African market, is sport. We started to see big sports organizations go direct to consumer. If you look at F1's offering and F1 subscriptions, massive. You look at the rise of DAZN in Europe, they've gone up against traditional broadcasters. They've got billions of pounds in shareholder money. They've bought sports rights. I think everybody's just waiting for that one tipping point of the big four, whether it's Facebook or Amazon or whomever, to go out and buy rights and to compete with the traditional monopolistic acquisition of rights for sport. Sports could be a huge disruption in the subscription space. And I know there's various position papers, various approaches to the competition commissions. ICASA has looked at how sports rights are acquired and the breaking up of different rights packages. I think we're going to see a big play in the sports space. And I think that could have a major impact on the African market. We focused a lot today on entertainment, but I think sports is another one to watch. And platforms like the one we're on, I think that more and more corporate commercial streaming offerings, conferencing offerings are going to come into the marketplace in Africa as well. So it's going to be crowded for sure, and there's going to be more and more pressure on those networks. But yeah, it's going to be fun to watch, particularly at the top end.
Thank you very much, all of you, for this enriching discussion. So I would like to thank you all for your attention for the first edition of Nextv Content Distribution Africa. So thank you to all our sponsored moderators, attendees. A special thanks to Deutsche Welle, TVU Network, and France 24. So please stay connected on our website for our upcoming event for 2021, but also for 2022. So have a nice evening, all of you, and also thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
See you
Thank
soon.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.